Amidst the chaos of daily life, it's easy for one to forget the truth that resides deep within the self. That every single one of us, in fact every single thing, is connected to something much greater. This book is an invitation to reconnect you with that lost divine spark, the real you, the God within. We live in a seemingly fast-paced world that consistently demands our attention, where the overwhelming noise of external expectations and societal norms can blur the voice of our true self. But buried under the surface of these distractions lies a divine truth waiting to be brought to light. You are greater than your thoughts, your past, as well as immediate circumstances. You are divinely pure in nature. And your path should be one of awakening or rekindling that divinity. The path is not about seeking anything outside of yourself. It's about realizing the uncharted space of potential which is still hidden to you, but of very profound power, wisdom, and love that has always been laying dormant inside you. The purpose of this book is to guide you on a journey of inner discovery, which will allow one to shed the layers that obscure one's true essence. You will learn about the simple states which will allow you to tap into your higher self, the part of you that is all-knowing, calm, tranquil, wise, unconditionally loving, and limitless in potential and regarding what's possible. My objective is to make the process of spiritual realization easy enough to grasp, in a sense, through describing the states of being and mental attitudes which encourage the self to emerge. Through this journey, you will learn the mechanisms of awakening your inner power and connecting to the powerful faculty which most people today refer to as intuition. Old wounds will be healed and limiting beliefs transcended. The process involves living with greater purpose, clarity, and presence. For it is only through aligning with your true path will you get to step into your highest potential. This is not some quick once-off awakening manual, but an ongoing path, a process that invites one to marry divinity and experience a much deeper, broader sense of being in a moment-to-moment basis. The higher self is most definitely attainable, depending on one's willingness to sustain alignment with this truth. As you read these lines, know that the journey has commenced and you're already on the path. The God within you has always been there, and this short guide is simply a reminder to open your heart, your mind, and your soul to the infinite possibilities that await or exist. So if you are ready to step into the light of your higher self, the journey begins now. Chapter 2, Things to Keep in Mind. First and foremost, engrave upon your mind the fact that change, the lasting kind, doesn't occur overnight. It requires a lot of intentional effort from the change seeker. The process needs patience, determination, detachment to outcomes, consistent and constant nurturing of mind, body and soul, an open-minded approach to experiencing life, in general, humility towards everything around you, deep compassion for self and the recognition of the self in everything around you. Understand there will be days when you don't see or feel the point of pushing forward. Moments of weakness will come along either to test your will not to break or your willingness to rise above the setbacks. Relationships might fall apart. You might have to be alone most of the time, but always bear in mind that all that happens does so for you. So there's no need to feel bad about those moments of slipping when you catch yourself engaged in some past, destructive habit for any specific time being, when you probably don't prefer engaging in but happen to find yourself playing out. Such things do happen, and you must give yourself the freedom, the room, to unlearn your past conditioning. You need to dig up certain beliefs in order to get to the self which has been buried by all the psychological impressions you've been stacking over a span of years. This is a process of digging out old roots so there can be space for new seeds to be sown. However, the seeds must be sown with no desire for fruit whatsoever. One must trust that the fruits will come along, but the fruits must not be the focus because such a mindset is one of attachment and attachment is the equivalent of bondage. In a simple sense, the path of spirituality means unbinding oneself from the material aspects of existence, including the more subtle material that comes in the form of thought and emotion. It's about relinquishing identifications which we've come to mistaken for the self but actually are not the self. Those limiting beliefs, the traumas we carry instead of letting go, the negative ego and all its irrational complexities. It's about seeing all these things in oneself if they are there, and going past them towards liberation, or what humans refer to as freedom of mind. And always remember, you are never alone, everything around is one with you, especially the forces you don't see. Your current position is a reflection of this truth, that you are supported by everything, God, universe, in everything that you do. But in order to become conscious of something, you must first pay attention to it. So if it's abundance you seek, that's precisely where attention need be paid. Likewise, if you are seeking the self, then you must pay the deepest attention to yourself. Chapter 3. The Choice. There's a point in every man's, woman's, journey when sacrifice becomes the sole catalyst for healing and ultimately growth. A point when we must make a decision regarding what we know is best for our well-being and intentionally choosing to align with it. That's if we do choose to align with it. We usually don't know what we want from life when we start out, but eventually we do begin to get ideas, inspirations, opportunities, given we remain open. However, it's what we do with them which determines the trajectory of our evolutionary process. In such moments we are forced to step outside our comfort zone, because we find ourselves having to partake in activities which we are not quite familiar with. We are propelled to step into the unknown. I call it the test of experience, because it is in such situations we get to gauge ourselves based on the results we produce, if we do choose to take the leap of faith. And oftentimes we happen to discover that the chosen path actually leads to where we are meant to go to uncover hidden talents, higher purpose, or what we love to do in general. And more often than not, what we love to do turns out to be exactly what we are called for, because it is an expression of who we truly are. Then the other aspect of the test is mainly centered around our willingness to take the leap of faith in the first place, and the sad reality is most people never do. Especially if it involves them having to think for themselves and living beyond their limited scope of safe knowledge. And so you find people settling for life arrangements which they don't really prefer, but nevertheless settle for because of survival, fear-driven, or material needs. In simple terms, because they get to stay in their comfort zone. Then time will do what it does best in such a situation: it deepens the rabbit hole, therefore making it harder for the person to break free from this self-perpetuating cycle, because that's all they know at that point. But if for whatever reason the willingness for change is developed in the person, then sacrifice will be the only potential for salvation. Because once you know what you don't want, and are willing to go wholeheartedly for that you do want, sacrifice becomes a very easy, no-brainer option. Whether it's sacrificing a way of thinking, non-beneficial habits, unmotivated company, anything and everything that misaligns you from your truth, such sacrifice will certainly create space for abundance in your very life energy. And the way you experience your existence will reflect this shift. It's all a matter of choice though, so in a sense, the point that I was referring to in the beginning of the chapter is always open for the person who is willing to make the choice to be willing, so to speak. So if you feel like something about yourself is holding you back, then you can always choose to change it by sacrificing it for something else or things which will encourage inner healing and growth. You really don't have to hold on to things which don't serve you anymore, for that's the worst form of self-sabotage. It will only pull you further away from God and His divine plan, and mediocrity will become your constant companion. And greatness is not possible for such a weak-minded person. Chapter 4. Follow the Heart. I'll have to start this chapter off by emphasizing how imperative it is not to personalize the contents of physical reality. Simply put, never take any happenings to heart, for doing so is basically giving life, emotion, to the mental movies which come about as a byproduct of your experience of physical existence. Don't allow your heart to get entangled in the contents of your mind, for doing so puts you in a deep state of reactivity. And once in such a state you'll find yourself attached to things, ideas which you have no business associating your being with. In a sense, you losing purity of experience symbolizes your inability to stay detached. Your very life energy gets polluted by your clinging of physical reality and its manifestations. Therefore clarity becomes elusive, keeping you confused and more often than not, overly impulsive. The heart is where truth resides, therefore the heart must remain dominant. Simply put, you must have heart. The fact that blood flows from heart to brain, which is the house of mind, should be more than enough evidence that the heart must indeed come first. Hence the saying, follow your heart for the heart knows. The heart is where God resides, and God is divinely pure. God is all-knowing, while the mind can prove very limited and unreliable. The mind is but a library and should be treated as such, a storehouse of information and impressions, both positive and negative. It's only useful as a connecting tool and nothing more. So you shouldn't let yourself get lost, or worse, trapped in it. Because essentially what that means is that your mind is now leading your heart. In other words, your heart is fueling the mind way more than it should. At that point the mind has become the master and you, and your heart, the slave, because it can make you react, emotionally, to any thought it plays. So if that's the case, other people and external situations can more easily get you to react in ways you cannot resist, because your mind is in control and it practically wants to react to everything positive and negative, but the negative is sure to stand out in terms of reaction inducement. And I'm not saying the mind is not important, because it really is. However, unlike the heart, it needs constant cultivation in order to maintain clarity, and a clear mind is less likely to stir up toxicity in the heart. It's easier to follow the heart when the mind is clear. Chapter 5. The Self. It's very common for I, the ego, the routines, the memories, the psychological reality which doesn't really reflect reality but one's perception, to hold the real self back. For me, the self represents the natural, unfiltered aspect of being. It's independent of external reality, nor is it dependent on what we consider as conscious thought. It's the self beyond the I. The self that we become when the mind is silent and therefore pure. It's not biased, it's not defensive, it's calm and formless, it's not limited to mind activity. It goes beyond neutrality, but possible only through it. Neutrality is in fact a reflection of it. I remember there was a point in time when I thought phrases like letting the mind past go or surrendering to the self to be very esoteric. Only now do I realize their underlying, intended message. The truth is not really hidden in the words, we only get to experience the truth as a byproduct of moving on, as well as knowing what works and what's counterproductive, and actually taking the steps to living the lessons we are supposed to learn, because otherwise we wouldn't have been presented with them. Not letting go is experiencing the lessons, but still choosing to live out the cycles which brought about the lessons in the first place. Hence it seems like the same things keep happening to us. It's because we choose to operate from the same energy which produced the lessons, again, in the first place. One must understand that things don't happen to us, they happen for our betterment. So if certain scenarios keep playing themselves out, it's because we choose not to do better even though we may know better, especially when we know better. And the longer we hold on, the harder the struggles become and more brutal their same lessons, even though they might change in form. We let go of the past mind for the purpose of beginning new cycles of experience. That's the only way true evolution happens. This is a form of liberation, but just like the process of experience, life, liberation too is a journey. But if walked truthfully and wholeheartedly, it becomes lighter, easier with the passage of moments, and its roots grow deeper in the dimension of soul. When this happens, we become more tuned into the higher self, thereby becoming more of ourselves. At that point we are pushing forward on the scale of evolution as opposed to holding ourselves back and staying the same. So with that being said, live up to your potential, because anything less than that is mediocrity. Chapter 6. The nature of God is your nature. Your essence is identical to that of the Creator, who is also the creation, just as you are. I honestly can't stress this point enough. Your physicality is only a tiny fraction of your infinite nature. It has been said countless times that you were made in the image of God, which is the source of everything, so you are quite literally an embodiment of all that is. Meaning the whole of existence is, in a non-physical sense, inside you, and you are not inside of it. Instead, it's but a mere reflection of your raw, unfiltered nature. But because you have free will, it is your responsibility to decide upon the nature of the experience you will have as your individual, micro-self in relation to your higher self. The choice, or string of choice, ultimately becomes your personal filter. Simply put, you are the means by which creation, which is the creator of physical existence, gets to experience itself. So basically, we are born for the purpose of realizing or remembering what we once were before we came into physical reality, because again, physical reality is only a reflection of the non-physical. Physical reality is a symbol of all that happens within, hence the saying, as within so without. As above so below. We create in the same way creation created us, along with the universe body, which is creation in its manifested form. The only difference is we don't know that we do. In fact, most of us don't even know how to, at least not consciously. We are, in a sense, unconscious of ourselves, therefore we are unconscious of consciousness. As a result, we remain stuck in things which are finite, thereby limiting our infinite potential. And what's more sad is that we refuse to learn. We even refuse to learn how to learn because we've become accustomed to the ignorance of things unseen. And so we are easily fooled by the appearance, physicality, of reality instead of getting to know the nature of reality, which is inevitably the self. No wonder it's so easy to fool people nowadays. It's because they are already fooling themselves. Just consider the fact that figures like Buddha and Christ taught how to transcend physicality as a way of attaining unity with God, thereby breaking free from mental bondage. Today people worship the symbol of Christ, even though some texts might suggest that Jesus never desired to be an object of worship. He wanted people to learn the truth which would set them free. He taught ways of opening the single eye. He advocated for love and oneness beyond physicality. So what does our current position say about us? I believe because our idea of God is tied to a symbol based on a physical idea, namely the figure Jesus on a cross, at least for most people, we are more inclined to place physical reality above all else. Hence the majority of the world's population is plagued by attachment, and so money runs the world. Most people only know themselves as the past they've experienced in physical reality. It's because people recognize God as separate from them, as being somewhere out there and listening to the prayers from the skies. What a joke! Wake up, dear reader. God starts from within you and shapes everything around you. You carry God inside you. And so the real you is him, or her. He is non-physical in nature, he is energy, so you must learn how to feel him, listen to him in stillness and silence, and connect with him through love, for that's the language he hears best. Chapter 7. Names are just labels. Your name is just a label for your face. It's not really who you are, nor does it reflect what you truly are. Who you are is not limited to your family, background, education, lifestyle, bank balance, or country. I'd say you are quite literally free to be yourself at any time of your choosing. I suppose it would be easier, being oneself, if we were never taught who we are in the first place, or even who we were meant to be, typically by the outside world. We've gotten so accustomed to concepts and structures that anything beyond that is seemingly uncharted territory. For some reason we fear transcending the labels which we've come to identify with, because we'd rather insist on the comfort that comes from letting the lies planted in our minds play on. And yes, that's very much delusional, but at least the illusion is familiar to us. The irony is, there is no such thing as a lie, nor is there even truth, because again these are just words which we try to utilize for communicating or describing a specific nature of taking an experience. Some things are real while others only seem real on the surface, which is crazy given that the surface is the only thing that we get to see in physical reality, at least with the naked eye using the senses. Likewise with everything else which humans think they know, all the labels, all the names. These things are meant to be a conclusion of some form of creation, or some abstract idea. Apparently we do this because we can never bear the thought of not knowing something, let alone being incapable of explaining it. We forget that some things just can't be boxed in titles, nor do they have to make sense or be logically understandable. I mean, yes, words make it easy to track physical reality, but no word is final, absolute, simply because physical reality is constantly changing. So if that's the case, why do we hold onto words, labels, concepts, ideas, like they are divine law? You were given a name by a certain couple from a certain tribe, or tribes, with certain beliefs and traditions who expect you to be like them just because. And because we are so damn dependent as a majority, conventionally speaking, and by someone's design, I suspect, most of us do fold quickly. I mean, of course we never knew better, especially when we are born into a random house, all alone and all innocent. We were at the mercy of others for way too long for it not to have a significant and deep impact on how our life, experience, would play out. Just think about it. You are given a name, you are related to in a unique way, not because you are unique but because of the particular household you were raised in. The people raising you probably have that slavery, victim, mentally, which eventually rubs off on you. They are negative because they are hurting, therefore you get exposed to toxicity, even if it's subtle. Then you grow up and come to realize that you've developed certain characteristics, some of which you have no idea as to how they were formed. And all of this, tied to a single name, a name which you were called until you mistook it for who you actually are. The name is not who you are the presence that remembers the name. You are the person having thoughts, in word form, and not the thoughts themselves. You are the one believing, you are not the belief. Life is not limited to titles. Nor was it meant to be, hence it's so unfortunate to see how humans are drowning in confusion nowadays. You were given a name by a certain couple from a certain tribe, or tribes, with certain beliefs and traditions who expect you to be like them just because. And because we are so damn dependent as a majority, conventionally speaking, and by someone's design, I suspect, most of us do fold quickly. I mean, of course we never knew better, especially when we are born into a random house, all alone and all innocent. We were at the mercy of others for way too long for it not to have a significant and deep impact on how our life, experience, would play out. Just think about it. You are given a name, you are related to in a unique way, not because you are unique but because of the particular household you were raised in. The people raising you probably have that slavery, victim, mentality, which eventually rubs off on you. They are negative because they are hurting, therefore you get exposed to toxicity, even if it's subtle. Then you grow up and come to realize that you've developed certain characteristics, some of which you have no idea as to how they were formed. And all of this, tied to a single name, a name which you were called until you mistook it for who you actually are. The name is not who you are the presence that remembers the name. You are the person having thoughts, in word form, and not the thoughts themselves. You are the one believing, you are not the belief. Life is not limited to titles. Nor was it meant to be, hence it's so unfortunate to see how humans are drowning in confusion nowadays. Chapter 8. You are everything. You deserve everything because you are everything, and so you get to experience everything just as you are. Not only are we alive to witness all there is, but we come fully equipped with everything we will ever need to experience ourselves as fully as possible. You can actually experience yourself any way you please. In fact, that's the only way we can truly experience existence, as we are, because there isn't a time we don't choose how to be, especially when we are not really ourselves, and that's the level of freedom creation has granted us. Meaning, even if you don't stay true to your nature, you still must have an experience. So in such a case, it would be one misaligned with your potential, therefore you wouldn't get to experience your being as much as you really can. Take it from me when I say, the experience of existence through one's self can get very intense when one's capacity for experiencing the self is broadened. If you start to experience more of yourself within yourself, then your experience of external reality will ultimately become more. So in a sense, you are your experience, or rather should I say your experience is you. However, when I say experience, I'm not referring to those moments we've gone through. I'm talking about that one moment that's always happening, which is the now, as opposed to the past we call memory and the future we call imagination. If you identify with your ego self, mind self as opposed to your true natural self, then that's precisely what your experience will be. It will be limited to the contents of your psychological programming, your known past. But once you understand that everything around you can only be experienced through you, you will soon realize how you see and relate to yourself truly matters. The source of self is ultimately nothing, hence the self can be anything, therefore it shouldn't be limited to no particular thing. So we should never limit ourselves to the thoughts we have, or the beliefs we've been sold, because doing so stifles our potential, which then limits how much of what we are meant to experience do we actually get to experience. So if, for example, you identify with trauma wounds, then your experience will amount to just that. If you allow pain the permission to live inside you, then you'll most likely have a painful experience of existence. What you are is what you must experience, and what you experience should be independent of external circumstances. However, if you identify with external objects or ideas inspired by external reality, then you are more likely to get triggered by external conditions. That's precisely how your experience gets hijacked, in a sense. There are priming systems in place meant to keep us trigger happy, and when we do get triggered, we are more likely to react to whatever is triggering us as opposed to responding by choosing not to respond at all. You are not your name, you are not your job title, you are not your status in society, you are not your family, you are not a good citizen. Nor are you a bad or good man or woman to your spouse, but you are everything and more. You are the one who gets to determine what flavor of experience you are permitted to experience at any given time. Chapter 9. Flavor of Experience. In this chapter we will explore the concept of experience in much depth. But as you read these lines, I want you to keep in mind that everything I share stems from my own personal experience, journey, and my reason for sharing this information is to help my fellow human beings transcend the bondages of self-imposed limitations for which I too, once upon a time, was a slave. I wish to make it known that life is happening for you, and how you experience it, regardless of external circumstances, is only a matter of how you prefer to experience it. But first you must learn to live peacefully within yourself, and realize once and for all that the world outside of you, external reality, doesn't make you who you are. But you do experience it as you are. So simply put, everything begins with you. And once you truly know this, you can begin the process of adjusting your energy, frequency to match the flavor of experience you wish to have. Just as you devote your attention to things outside of you, you must place more of that attention to the inner workings of your being, because effort and commitment will be required of you if you are to redefine what experience, on an individual level, means for you moment to moment. The irony is you are already doing it, perhaps unconsciously, and unconsciously because you've laid your foundation outside yourself. You've been conditioned to give your power away. And as a result, external forces have more power to influence how you experience your being and ultimately what you do. And so you'll depend on external factors for happiness, wholeness, love, and so forth. States of being which you can learn to induce yourself. Not only that, but also normalize, thereby choosing that particular flavor of experience as opposed to being dependent on variables which you have no control over. And these could come in the form of people, situations you come across, career paths, and so forth. However, there is no need whatsoever to wait for these things to bring you happiness or a sense of worthiness. You need only embody the beingness you want to feel, experience. So your inner world must be your first priority, because it will determine how you experience your outer world, external reality. That's why spirituality is so vitally important. It allows more room for creation because everything begins first in the form of spirit. You being alive is because of spirit, so live within the spirit. Be one with it. Although keep in mind that the process won't happen overnight and it requires utter conviction. But believe me when I say it's worth it. This is the process of creating a relationship with your highest self, the self which your experience will directly reflect. So in a sense, it's a process of cultivating a loving relationship with existence itself, for you make existence possible. Because without you there wouldn't be existence for you to experience. That's how valuable you are. Chapter 10. We always choose experience. We experience many things, but what matters is how we let ourselves experience everything. One can look at the ground and see dirt, which has a negative connotation, or one could simply witness the ground and see soil, which is life-giving. What is to be considered good or bad is merely relative and depends heavily on the observer and their level of perception, which will certainly determine the nature of moment-to-moment experience. We separate the good from the bad, and in so doing, create inner conflict as a result of the separation irrespective of context and situation. We look at circumstances through the eyes of limited judgment. So when a situation seems negative, we then conclude that it is and therefore miss its true purpose entirely, which is always growth-related. One may wallow at the loss of a lover as opposed to discerning the message of what creation is saying. One may overlook the intention of cause and get so consumed by effect. However, one must understand that everything happens for a reason, and even though at times we may not like or prefer a particular outcome, we must learn to accept and allow growth to take shape. Today, as it stands, life in society has become so complex and demanding, unpredictable and brutal, selfish and cunning, that it's absolutely imperative for one to develop a strong foundation and an unshakable mindset. A mindset of opportunity and abundance, especially when days seem dark and friends become few. One must learn to embrace the dance of life, for what doesn't kill is sure meant to make you stronger. Chapter 11. Your perception matters. Here's a fact which is still, unfortunately, unconventional within most communities. Our existence is mainly centered around creation and evolution, even though the opposite is true depending upon the choices we make. And as we evolve, things, the environment, around us also begin to mirror that evolution. That's how we come to change the world. The process of changing the world involves shifting your paradigm. You must change how you see the world. You must look at it differently. You look at it differently by defining it differently. In other words, by how you choose to call things, because how you call things is how you will experience them. Changing how you view the world is necessary for personal change, as well as change in general, but more especially for locating and building connection with the self. Your world is the overall relationship you have with experience, and this includes things like people, places, belief systems, etc. All these add up to make one indivisible whole, thereby shaping your experience of reality. Reality is a canvas, and you are the artist with unlimited potential. And the more you practice creating your experience, the better you must become, for nature declares that fact to be one of absolute truth. In fact, it's nature's promise. As the older generation man once said, as within so without. So what you put in will bear correlating outcomes. And if you put nothing specific in, then what you'll get is what the world around you will be willing to give. At the end of the day, we all get what we deserve. So if you give no value because you didn't cultivate it in the first place, your world will lack the fulfillment which we are all so desperate for. Chapter 12. Box or vessel. At the present moment I feel as though I'm caught between two worlds, the world which is of mind that makes up our individual experience, and the world of existence which basically makes up everything we know, see, and plenty more we don't know, see. For the most part of my existence I would say I was sleeping through life. I was limited to a particular experience. I was blinded by the disconnection which I didn't even know I was experiencing, because as we grow up from the point of birth, the older individuals around us are assumed to know better, and therefore we get easily influenced by them. And for the longest while I too was a victim of this wicked setup. But fortunately a very curious victim at heart. This curiosity eventually presented me with the blessing of courage. In many ways it became my rebirth, because since that moment in time my experience of life has never been quite the same. Now I'll get to the point of the story. It's a theory, but a simple theory. So basically, there are two main ways of experiencing existence. One as what I call the box, and the other as a vessel. The box represents the ego. It's the person we've assumed we are, in other words, our identity. The aspect of ourselves we get to hold onto, the person with endless, but familiar attachments. Attachments which make the whole process of being us, constantly and consistently, getting to feel like us, a whole lot easier. The mode of Maya, as the yogis call it. Maya meaning illusion. The direct reflection of the creative potential we as human beings have inherited. The gift of possibility. It is a canvas we have at our disposal, given that you've earned its access, but one you still must consciously attain and keep yourself in tune with. Which leads me to the second point. But before we move on, let it be known that I do not consider myself a master of life in any respect. I am merely conveying my truth. My journey. Now, the vessel. The byproduct of a dimension which the physical senses alone cannot reach. Its access is acquired through the subtler forms of doing, such as cultivating silence, paying broader attention to existence, showing life some interest, maintaining presence or breathing consciously, just to name a few practices. The very same things which the majority of the society's population never seem to mind investing in externally so, outwardly as opposed to doing so inwardly, thereby investing the same powerful forces internally for the benefit of one's evolution. This is important because life begins within. We experience the ups and downs of life from within us, the world we so often neglect to the point of inhuman conditions, because by then we've become, in a sense, our bodies. Nowadays I think of the body as a vehicle, because it is. So my analogy involves a driver and a passenger seat, as well as three scenarios. In the first there's you, the ego, driving, with the instructor occupying the passenger. The instructor symbolizes infinite intelligence, God. In such a case you are in the box, slightly open, but have subtle access to the source dimension, the state of heaven. Meaning you have some awareness of a higher power, broader experience. Second, there's the ego traveling, in a sense, alone. In such a case you are basically sleeping through life due to the lack of a rooted sense of aliveness, then you are truly alone without direction. I bet that sounds familiar. The third scenario, the ego is seated on the passenger, with the instructor driving. The third scenario symbolizes what being a vessel means. This is the state of flow, when we feel our most powerful, when tasks flow effortlessly, when we can simply do no wrong. When all we have to do is pay witness. I know we've all had such an experience at some point in our lives. It's because of such a moment I realized that there's definitely a whole lot more to who I am than I've been made to believe. And I've dedicated my existence to learning what that is, and sharing my discoveries with my fellow human beings, so that they too may find liberation for themselves within their own selves. Chapter 13. Escaping the mind loop. Finding the self is not as easy as people say or think it is, but then again it's a fairly simple process. Finding the self actually means losing what you have for so long considered as yourself, for we can only find what is truly the self when we've learnt to let go of what isn't. We must understand that experience, although we've been taught is built on what's known, is actually quite flexible. So flexible that it can maintain a certain sense of being for as long as that self is known and embraced. Finding the self essentially means living without any knowing. With that being said, I welcome you, reader, to the path of self-realization. A much broader, harmonious world characterized by universal unity. However, not everyone is guaranteed to go the whole way, although that too is not guaranteed. It's a choice every single person will have to make and see out till the very end. And with this book I seek to guarantee that possibility. We can all find the self within ourselves and each other, and I promise the world won't stop or end if we do. Instead, we are more likely to create a more proactive world of godlike levels of expression, and inevitably become like Christ, or, better put, what he represented. It can be quite a heavy burden though, at first. Uprooting deep weeds, facing your demons head on. Perhaps these demons we've unconsciously created, but even so they'll remain there only up until we have learnt and come to terms with their true lessons. If we choose to ignore these lessons, they will stick around and grow in volume so much that the noise and turmoil will get reflected in your very reality. Isn't it funny that the demons we create can take us over like that? It's not a cause for shame though. In fact, the darkest parts of who you are need the most love, and through this purification process, finding the self, your weaknesses become your source of strength. Darkness fades away in the light of love. And this applies for any situation one might be seemingly trapped in. Although you should know that if you ever find yourself feeling trapped, then you are most likely trapped in your mind, and once trapped in the mind it's impossible to be or embrace the self. Instead you become the mind, which is rooted in your past experience and desires yet to be fulfilled. Essentially what that means is, what you've come to mistaken for who you are, is in a literal sense, not the real you. It's just memory you consistently choose to embody, perhaps unknowingly, but you still do. Once you've stopped identifying with the mind, then the self will begin to shine forth. Chapter 14. Stepping outside the mind to stop overthinking. Ever since I set out on my spiritual journey, ever since I've been striving to go beyond what, for the longest time, I had considered to be myself, looking back now I realize how my mind kept on challenging the notion every step of the way, especially when I felt I was making the most progress. Sometimes it gets so overwhelming that you find yourself drifting aimlessly in the confusion, which more often than not, leads one to question one's very process of growth and discovery. It's more like a back and forward dance which requires constant assertiveness on your part as the seeker, because you must learn to lead your mind or else it takes over control and keeps you stuck within its familiar, limited, known conditioning, in a simple sense. Trapped within it. Therefore this path is to be taken with utter conviction for it to bear the most fruit, not for the sake of the fruit itself but for a much deeper purpose. Our challenge in these modern times is that people are now addicted to overthinking and they are easily stimulated by outside forces. While most can't even stop themselves from thinking, especially those negative thoughts that are caused by the limiting beliefs which they identify with so much. In a sense they've become addicted to their own mental content. So they are basically addicted to the cycles of addiction, and perhaps it's because of such conditioning we've experienced, we've now become primed for addiction, attachment. Looking at the human race now, it would seem as though we are emotional, impulsive beings. This is so only because we allow it to be, we in fact, encourage it. For some reason we are always drawn outside ourselves and never inside. We've become too attached to physical reality and so we overthink everything which we've been made to believe is important in our lives. Overthinking, in a nutshell, is simply thinking the same thoughts over and over again. So to break the loop of overthinking we must learn new things, and get used to the idea of always thinking differently as a reflection of our constant growth, because doing so will allow us to learn more and ultimately be more. That's one of the ways we can go beyond the mind, because until the mind is tamed, spirituality or finding oneself will be next to impossible. Simply because an untamed mind is a very loud mind. A restless mind, a chaotic mind, and such a mind cannot afford one the clarity of self, beauty, nor what is pure love. Your mind can be either your biggest ally or your worst nightmare. I don't know about you, but I prefer a peaceful mind, inner harmony, and for the mind to attain peace it must have no attachments, instead it must be free. In a simple sense, stop overthinking. Overthinking drains mental energy and keeps your experience dull and stagnant. Instead you should learn to appreciate the present moment for what it is, and what it is literally everything. Because everything always happens in the present moment, so you can never overthink the now, only what we remember or anticipate, past or future, we can overthink. Complete presence, awareness is how we step outside our minds. Chapter 15. The past is a trap. The more you actively remember your past, the further you drift away from yourself, and in this self lies your unhindered power. So the more you identify with the stories of your past experience, the more you tell them to others, that's the more you actually solidify the illusion of limitation, which is only as big as your most cherished memories, and I mean that quite literally. A quiet inner world is without a doubt one of the main catalysts of experiencing the real self and all its divine privileges. Their mind, on the other hand, is a handy analyzing tool, so it has to remember well in detail, and so to catch detail it has to look at everything very closely in a more narrow-like focus. Specifically the things which we consciously pay attention to. So when we identify with the details, stories, memories, in the mind, we automatically assume the narrow paradigm of the micro, lower, mind, and so become confined to the way it relates to external reality, which is very limited and is the conditioning most humans know today. Nothing but moments in a backpack we carry proudly and which we fool ourselves into believing we are, while we, in actual fact, are not. What we are is basically nothing, and the thing with nothing is that it can become anything at any given time because possibilities are endless, definitely a millionfold more than the ones we currently acknowledge as being exceptional, according to society at least. Detach your perception from the mind and its baggage. Once the weight of everything you are not is discarded, only then can you be free to be, see, feel, speak, dream as the expanded consciousness which is the self, not only the self but the purest and most authentic version. Recognize who you are not in order to realize who you are. Forget who you are not in order to remember who you are. Be who you are in order not to be who you are not. Let your sense of self expand beyond your thoughts and beliefs, for you are the one who has those thoughts and beliefs. Stop holding on to times long dead because they diminish your life force, slowly but surely. To prevent this, you must connect to your higher mind. Commit to cultivating and maintaining the connection with the reality that's always happening, the one we humans have come to call the present, and be sure to use faith as your foundation. Have faith in the process of your experience and trust the power that keeps your body, the planet, and the very universe alive, to present you always with exactly what you need and exactly when you need it. You are more likely to miss these things if your perception is mainly tied to the contents of your psychology, because the idea of going beyond the self comes forth as a result of loosening the grip you have on your mind. I'm not quite sure why it happens that way, but it does, and that's what's important. Just like how I don't know why my muscles grow when I lift weights, but they do. I mean, I've seen articles explaining why they grow and the science behind it, but the irony about every explanation we have is that we created it, us humans, with human-created language. That goes for science as well. It's been a while since I've stopped trying to make sense out of existence, and now I strive to experience existence as fully as humanly possible. This smallest shift in perception has richly enhanced my experience of reality. I feel it intimately nowadays, some moments more than others of course, but then it all depends on how present I am. However, if you don't believe me, then I dare you to try it for yourself. Change the narrative for just a month, and I promise that a mighty seed will be planted by then, and the more it grows, the more you will outgrow your mind, old known self. You might find yourself wanting to get to know more of yourself, but you will never find yourself in the mind. The self is in the now. Chapter 16. Side note. This is not a formal chapter as such, but the words do need to be studied meticulously. Their message is this: choose your problems wisely, and whatever you do, never ever under any circumstances run away from your problems. You shouldn't, simply because you are the one always creating them. Meaning you can never run away from your so-called problems because they are merely in your mind. And just to couple that with the fact, we most definitely cannot control everything around us, but we can most certainly learn how to control how we choose to perceive life and its many and inevitable ups and downs, how we process them and navigate them. But of course now we have focused on the downs. This is important and highly worth consideration because most people are actually carrying problems which are not their creation. Now in such a situation the problem could be the lack of accountability from the responsible person or party, but even so you have no control over such variables. However, you can still choose and must choose which battles are worth fighting and whether they align with your truth, the destiny, which is a pure reflection of who you truly are, or rather should I say who you are truly meant to be. Truth is always felt in the heart if or when the mind is calmed. I know you felt that unsettling feeling before making a decision which was universally bad for your life path. The doing which is misaligned with the God within you. Basically, whenever you betray yourself. The trick is not to cling to situations nor identify with them, because if you do, you'll stay trapped in them and keep attracting more of their kind. What you hold in your mind eventually becomes your reality, and if the content is negative, it becomes your living nightmare. So most people don't really have problems. In most cases, their problem is the next person's success. People tend to compare themselves with other people's appearances instead of focusing on what's happening inside themselves, and in so doing end up building resentment towards the world, all because it triggers feelings of inadequacy in them, just because they don't have what the next person has. That's basically how envy happens. But the real problem is self-neglect and too much focusing on who is doing what and what's happening where. Why is it so hard to love? It's because we live in fear. We care too much about symbols. We get oblivious to the self and as a result form the illusion of disconnection from love, which is experienced as fear. And so this plane becomes the ground in which a character will grow. This ground will eventually be a wasteland. Love is the beauty of nature. I will acknowledge the fact that we are always met with adversities, obstacles, harsh circumstances, but we really don't have to personalize such fleeting moments. For as long as you are alive, you can always do better, be better, and navigate your living better. Let love fill your heart. Act in love. That's the same as saying act in silence. You never really need a reason to do something, but if it's something that needs to be done, that's precisely what will happen. Given that you are one with all that is through the power of love. Everything is connected. And the universe doesn't make mistakes. If fear has overtaken your heart, then you'll see mistakes instead of what's really there. Keep in mind, everything that happens becomes relevant only because you are alive to perceive reality, and unless you've given away your power to fear, you also get to choose how you want to perceive life. Love is the easiest paradigm to embody. Chapter 17. Letting go of attachment. If action is performed for the sake of creation, then attachment to action is relinquished. More often than not, people act for the sake of gain, because that's what we've been taught. That's why we work for money, that's why we enter relationships for our own emotional fulfillment, sometimes for material gain as well. That's also why we go to the gym purely for muscle gain, to be seen. And these are just examples, but I'm sure you get the point. And so we keep reinforcing the idea of attachment without realizing that's what we are doing. We unconsciously prime ourselves for further attachment. I once heard someone say, how we do one thing is how we do everything. And I've come to see the truth in that statement. The energy we embody is the very same, personal, energy we exercise in doing a number of different tasks, and therefore the energy perpetuates itself through the different kinds of activities we participate in. So in a sense, the energy we embody on a personal level drives everything we do and inevitably breeds more of itself. And because the subject of energy doesn't carry that much importance for most people, at least not in a deeper sense, the understanding of it is very surface level, and therefore we remain unconscious of its deeper implications. We know what we know, and because we think we know, we don't go beyond this limited knowing. And as a result, our energy signature stays the same, and its roots only grow deeper, oftentimes, to the point of no return. That's when we are really attached. Hence it's so hard for people to experience or embrace change, because in order to change our experience we must first transmute our energy signature, because that's the only way to change it. It's not as complicated as it sounds. The key lies in how we define our reasons for performing the acts we perform. The same process is experienced differently by the person who acts out of love and the one who acts for personal gain, greed-driven. The same is true for how the process will affect them individually. while acts of love are done selflessly, thereby encouraging detachment. Acts performed with some future gain in mind encourage attachment to result, thereby strengthening the spirit of attachment. Most people won't tell you this, but attachment is one of the biggest enemies of mankind. It makes one exploitable, it evokes greed, it's a catalyst for envy, it's a tool used subtly and in countless ways to instill fear in the hearts of men. And so liberation is impossible without first transcending this human weakness. Chapter 18. Social Separation Drama. In this chapter the main focus will be a phenomena which I will refer to as social drama. It's no secret that almost everywhere humans exist we are sure to be met with some form of drama, and that it's only a matter of time and situation. This happens mainly because we have different perceptions of reality, which is no secret, different ideologies we hold dear, different drives as well as different impersonal programs and adopted belief systems, just to name a few of what I would like to call separation causes which plague societies and ultimately countless lives across the globe. We are born to environments designed to keep our minds confined to limited cycles of leading life. You are led to believe you are leading yourself while societal structures exist for the sole purpose of maintaining order, or should I say orders. When we are born we don't know better, we depend mainly on the environment we are born to, which is already in motion for us to do some catching up. The sad reality is that the collective consciousness is unconscious in the sense that communities are somewhat brainwashed to live confined and restricted existences. And this phenomena is accomplished through many and carefully constructed outlets, mediums, whether it be religion, educational systems, television, internet, day jobs, etc. These systems are created to maintain control over the masses of society. And I'm definitely not one to say whether that's a bad thing or not, because at the end of the day everyone was equipped with a mind, and once they hit a certain age or level of understanding they are absolutely free to choose what they personally want out of life, how they want to live life and what to believe in. The problem now is we believe in too many limited, mediocre concepts, and often things which we eventually identify with. In all honesty we are too divided, but like everything else it began with us, within ourselves. That is to say we are separated, fragmented, internally. Our lack of inner harmony is the reason we can't have harmonious relations with others around us or the very existence at large. Hence it's now normal to find people who suffer from a strong but lingering sense of lacking wholeness, and as a result they go above and beyond to try and fill this void with physical materials and pleasurable experiences, which usually doesn't work. This is only a short-term fix which actually bloodies more than it cuts in the long run. Such a scenario need not be the case though, because just a little bit of appreciation of everything you are and all the blessings you receive can make the biggest difference. Especially if you focus more on the vital blessings, such as life itself, because that's all you truly need to create an experience worth living, one harmonious with your innermost truth. We lack inner harmony when we move in ways which contradict love, because true love never lies, especially not to the self. But once this element is absent, frustration takes hold of the heart as a result of trying to fit in externally as opposed to moving according to one's innermost truth. Disharmony is only a reflection of misalignment, especially the one concerning one's personal experience. Chapter 19. The One Consciousness. For the longest time I've wondered hard about the deeper purpose behind individualism. I mean, you'd think that experience would be much more harmonious if only we didn't perceive reality so differently from one another, and so that made me question the true nature of the game which creation is playing. Over time I arrived at a handful of conclusions which only bred more questions, and more conclusions which bred even more questions. However, the biggest takeaway will have to be the idea which I'll refer to as conscious projection. It is believed that the reality we experience on an individual level is but a mere projection of our singular point of consciousness. But the twist is everything is one and the same consciousness. So that would imply that the separation of consciousness which is experienced as singular consciousness is in fact an illusion, one which I suspect is designed to help creation perpetuate itself in the form of evolution. Consider the saying two minds are better than one, a perfect example of separate consciousness seemingly adding up to make a bigger field of consciousness which would most likely create a new expression or body of consciousness. Consider also how babies are produced. Nature has left signs everywhere, but nevertheless the fact still remains: reality is one body of consciousness comprised of other lesser forms of consciousness. Meaning everything that we see and much more we don't see or still yet to comprehend are born of the same all-encompassing one consciousness. Going back to the idea of conscious projection, limitation stems from the false sense of separation which we've been conditioned to believe and ultimately experience as reality. So the singular individual experience, consciousness, we project is a stepped-down limited version of the one consciousness which is everything and beyond. And how do I know this? I have personally experienced unavoidable signs, and I'm sure some of you reading this have as well. Perhaps in the form of a coincidence, or a moment that felt like it was divinely timed or orchestrated. Like maybe having a thought about someone you haven't spoken to in ages only to have that person call right after the thought of him or her. Or maybe thinking of a question only to have someone randomly answer the question even though you didn't voice it out. Or perhaps being connected to someone so much that it's normal for you all to finish each other's sentences on a frequent basis. I don't know about you, but I personally don't believe in coincidences. I believe in mystery. I believe in the things which we don't know about existence and we consider impossible. Because we've been conditioned for limitation, but I've come to learn that the only way to transcend limitation is to rekindle the connection to Source, the one consciousness, for there is only one. Everything is one. We are one, we are all connected even though we might believe otherwise. We are connected through what most refer to as God, and becoming one with it is the key to expansion, to higher consciousness which naturally we are not separate from, otherwise we wouldn't exist. The connection, if established, might be experienced as love, faith, or abundance. It's one and the same energy. It allows one to tap into higher states of being. And the height is a direct reflection of the connection to God. So the more love you embody, the stronger the connection you'll share with reality, which is the one consciousness. I'm speaking from experience. There was a time I wouldn't be capable of thoughts which I'm currently laying down, but now I don't even have to lay them down myself, they just flow out of me. I am merely a vessel for one consciousness, and that's only possible through the connection I cultivated and continue to cultivate till this day. Deepening the connection is my main concern. It just so happens that I get to enjoy the byproducts, fruits, of my commitment. Now, with that being said, let go of limitation. It's not yours to keep and it's not you. God is inviting you to return to the real kingdom of heaven, and you need only be willing to go back to your home, for heaven is not a place for the dead, it's a state of being which is your birthright. Chapter 20. The Way of Love. The purpose of love is to show you what you are not conscious of. The people in our lives, even the ones we've become attached to as opposed to loving unconditionally, the adopted habits, all of these entities live in our minds. In a sense, they get to live through us, and us through them, so through the force that's love, at least to a degree, we quite literally carry each other in our psyches. I suspect it's for the purpose of channeling self-messages about those deeper parts of ourselves which we still meet with ignorance and avoidance. Hence the objects we are energetically connected to, more especially the people, whether we are conscious of it or not, mirror or reflect to us the darkness, negativity, we, at any given point of existence or present time, harbor in our being. The very way we are, the things we've allowed ourselves to resonate with. Irrespective of the fact that the majority of the planet's population thinks that the only things that happen or actually matter are only the things which they can see with a nude eye. However, there is a saying, and it says there is more to what meets the eye. Meaning there are layers of forces, or rather should I say a force, at play, most of which I personally can't seem to explain, but they are there and we've all felt them when there was a higher presence with us, or within our experience. But because the visits were short-lived and you lacked the capacity to decipher what they meant, represented. You probably downplayed such mystical experiences. I think all we have to do is maintain openness, and the most potent force to open the gates of expansion is through a concept which most mentally know to be love. But love is the very fabric of life, it's the very force that keeps existence afloat. But that's the thing with words, their power is capable of enslaving a mind to a particular construct, definition, more often than not without the subject even having the slightest suspicion to even consider the possibility of being mind-jacked like that. As much as we think we know, we must often consider the fact that we really don't know. However, we are fortunate to have a higher power which holds us and everything in this very existence in high regard. If that isn't love, then I don't know what is. So because most people are in their minds about what love is, which only sows more confusion, most never get to experience that unconditional kind of love, the one that makes you feel like a child because you are in fact the child of creation. Literally everything is. So we simply need not take on everything because we honestly don't stand a chance. The only thing you may think about, if you must, is alignment. Staying true to love. Be the way love would want the world to be, and by so doing you raise yourself to that possibility, because again the world, or what seems to be the world, is only your individual experience projected, played, through your own micro-consciousness. The truth is everything is consciousness, and consciousness is basically love, therefore love is the only thing that truly matters. What most mentally understand as God is only a belief, one which they've most probably been taught. The good news is, you need not look far for the answers you seek, everything is inside you, every solution to every problem concerning your experience already exists in you, in the ever-present silence which you can't experience because of the noise you unnecessarily carry. And I specifically use that term because the baggage is only there to drag you down slowly. Living, acting, doing, thinking, feeling, imagining from a place of unconditional love is the answer to everything. With love being the only focus, everything becomes experienced as love, elevated experience, therefore the energies of greed, trauma, guilt, hatred, because these entities are dark, the light of love will illuminate them, at the same time absorbing the lessons which come through any form of darkness. If you operate from a place of love, you will see basically everything you are meant to see. If not, the cycle, trap, will retain you until the time you are ready to go beyond it, simply because we attract what we are. Whether it's the people, circumstances, surroundings, these things are meant to reflect to us the energy we embody. And if it's far from love, the theme of experience will most likely involve suffering. But the more love we embody, the more abundance we will experience, whether in the form of relationships, wisdom, material possession, etc. Suddenly we feel very lucky. But it all begins with how we choose to conduct our individual experience, and what we feel is what we will perceive. Both love and the lack of it carry their own lessons. Lack of love will teach you how to love, although the process is often painful. While love will teach you how to live your highest truth by showing you the lies you find comfort in. Now that's true love, it's all about evolution. It's all about growth. It's all about the truth. Chapter 21. The Act of Love. Establish yourself before acting so that you don't lose yourself to the act. This is the essence of what we refer to as detachment. Keeping that in mind, the effect, whether positive or negative, of losing yourself to the act is actually quite relative, meaning losing yourself to the act can also be positive, constructive, given you lose yourself to the act by selflessly serving the act. In simple terms, by not getting yourself attached to outcomes or byproducts of any act in question. And also again, the nature of the act will determine whether you lose yourself to the act or not. For some acts will align you with your highest truest self, while others may go against what's true of you. Establishing oneself is, in a sense, the point of neutrality, the state of openness which leaves one susceptible either to the process of growth, given one stays open, neutral, or the pit of gradual destruction which comes as a result of closing oneself off, automatically not establishing the self. Establishing the self makes for maximum awareness of the act, which allows one more possibility or opportunity to derive the most benefit from any particular act, of course given that the act is a selfless act, an act of pure love. Meaning the process of the act is then the main focus without any attachment to the fruits. As opposed to acting purely for results, which essentially means acting from a place of non-establishment. Consider for a second all the nasty immoral things people do for the sake of personal gain. Well, that's the power of attachment at play. The force capable of compelling one to act in ways which he or she in a natural, neutral state of being, wouldn't even consider, not even for a second. Chapter 22. The Power of Silence. True for many reasons and applicable to many situations, the idea of silence being a major channel for creative power. However, like everything else about being human, we humans think we know. We are very limited in our stock of so-called knowledge. And that's because we conventionally, continuously, choose to overlook the deeper dimensions of things. Instead, we rather pretend as if other possibilities don't exist at all while settling for that which is good enough for survival. I'm not claiming to be better, nor am I claiming to know all there is to know, but because of certain behaviors I've come to adopt over a lengthy moment of time, these once foreign activities and attitudes afforded me experiences which defied what I had come to understand as human capability and richness of experience, in general. For the most part, silence has been one of the most effective means of getting closer to myself. And when I say silence, I don't mean silence in a conventional sense of silence, but rather the energy of it, and the act of tuning into the energy of it, and doing that consistently enough to gain improvement of handling and accessing this particular field of energy. Calmness is silence. Pureness is silence. Silence is not a matter of sound, it's the very foundation of everything in existence. Silence is a reflection of potential. Silence is that which is not manifest, so this silence is only a symbol of something far greater. If sound was material existence, then silence would be the unseen material from which everything is made. Silence is consciousness. So the more you actively practice the art of silence, the deeper your connection with the all-encompassing consciousness will become. So you can choose to live in silence, and if your mind is too loud a place, then, with time, you can most certainly cultivate inner silence. That's precisely what activities like meditation were designed for. The effects of meditation will be crucial for anyone who wishes to lead a spiritual existence, let alone finding the self, for that's simply what the process of spirituality is about, transcending one's mind and realizing the true self buried under the counterproductive beliefs, the judgmental thoughts, as well as the endless, often negative, mental chatter. You basically find the self by listening through the noise, to the point that it seems like the noise doesn't exist, by realizing that you are not the noise, but the quiet that's left when the noise has subsided. That's why being in solitude helps so much in the process of self-discovery, but most people can't seem to enjoy their own company, simply because they haven't put in the time, patience and effort to cultivate inner silence. Chapter 23. Staying neutral. In this chapter, one shall describe the concept of neutrality in the way I understand it, mainly because I truly believe it is key to the expansion of consciousness. Consider how things or external situations of themselves have no inherent meaning, and that it is us, by the power of perception, who get to assign what they mean to us. Hence you can find two people in the very same situation, yet experiencing the very same situation, at the very same time, differently. Where one can see tragedy, the other sees only opportunity, depending upon the mindset which they've cultivated. So in a sense there is no good or bad, it's how we choose to define things, circumstances, which makes all the difference. So the way I see it, it's best not to judge from a place of polarity, for such a stance might prove biased and limit one's perception. Only when the ego has been neutralized can you truly begin to live. You need not kill the ego like we so often hear is required in the spiritual journey, especially since that's not even possible without actually, literally, killing yourself. What most people consider as ego is more often than not the negative expression of it. So the key is found in maintaining a state of neutrality. The ego is one of the critical means by which experience is possible, and if neutralized, it enhances one's perception of reality, thereby strengthening one's ability of choice irrespective of external circumstances. Chapter 24. The main blockage. Ignorance is bliss, but the truth always catches on. If I had to think of one weakness that keeps most humans non-receptive, that weakness would most definitely have to be our ridiculous lack of open-mindedness, which we exercise in unnecessary and unmatched abundance, true at least for most people. Humans seem to have this insatiable need to always stand correct, even if it means ignoring everything that might suggest otherwise. But instead of admitting this shortcoming, we'd rather feign ignorance just for the sake of saving face. Simply put, we'd rather lie to ourselves about what's true even though the truth might actually set us, mentally and ultimately spiritually, free. Not for ego's sake, per se, but for the sake of protecting our delusion, for it is our precious creation, and we instinctively fight for what we consider to be ours, when we've become attached. So whenever our perception gets overruled, we often view it as a challenge, a personal attack, and tend to get defensive as opposed to finding growth in new, externally found insight. Our biggest challenge is the fact that we think our thoughts are important while in reality they are fleetingly unreal. Somehow we forgot that only we can make them real, hence we are capable of self-deception. Now my suggestion is this: don't make a prison out of your mind. Instead, forever keep your mind open so that the self is able to find freedom outside the mind's limitations. Simply put, learn to live beyond your thoughts, for they can get overwhelmingly intoxicating, and more often than not, very addictive, while at the same time driving what's truly the self further away from one's experience. So the next time you find yourself wanting to react impulsively to something provocative said to you by another, resist the urge of giving into your mental commentary, simply because a closed mind is irrationally biased and bloodies way more than it actually must cut. Not only that, but a mind that's closed is a mind that's incapable of learning because it unconsciously believes that it already knows everything it needs to know, at least for its survival. What's interesting about keeping an open mind is that the mind is not the only thing that gets opened. We have to consider the fact that the mind is part of a system, and this system functions holistically for us, so that little adjustment of mind can be the difference between the expansion of your consciousness, higher vibrations, broader perception, deeper knowing, and you falling deeper into the pit of self-sabotage. When the mind is open, and therefore discerning, blockages start to dissolve and energy flows freely throughout the body and its subtle counterpart, the subtle body. Opening the mind sets off this chain reaction of openness, receptivity and trust, faith. Once the mind is open, the heart must soon follow suit, and once the heart is open, the experience itself opens up. Therefore we become open to new experiences, even though we might be experiencing something which would consider known or old. The individual experience of our being takes on a fuller quality, and that's the power of openness. Chapter 25, Delusion. We are all victims of delusion. Yep, that's right. Believe it or not, we are all caught up in some form of self-delusion. And we are deluded because the reality which we experience individually is our own creation, it's experience based on how we personally choose to define or interpret it. Therefore we can never truly share experience with others simply because experience, at least on humanity's current level of experiencing, is exclusive to the individual, or so we've been made to believe. You see, if you can get enough people to believe in something or some idea, then that thing or idea becomes a collective reality, effort, only then will that particular thing or idea be considered real. Because everything about human societies happens in agreement. However, this goes beyond just society and its subjects, it begins, internally, with us. We always have to agree, or disagree, with everything we encounter in our experience. For example, if a seemingly stressful situation arises, we bear the responsibility of agreeing to it by either allowing the stress to have a hold on us, therefore inducing a reaction, or we could simply choose to remain calm in the moment, thereby, in a way, disagreeing with the stressful situation. But this is a choice we must first make internally before we can respond in real-time, physical reality, and that's always the case irrespective of what the nature of the situation might be. This act of assigning meaning to life is the power behind delusion, because no one will ever truly see life the way you do, at least not exactly, so your experience of life is unique to you as the experiencer, and the best part is you have the freedom to believe whatever you want to believe. I don't know about you, reader, but that sounds like self-delusion to me. Chapter 26. The Responsibility. With great responsibility comes great power, but then I guess the reverse is also true. At some point I realized that the construct we experience as life is experienced individually, so it's important not to get attached to labels. Everything you think you know is actually a label of some concluded idea which we've somewhere somehow come to believe in. We are only limited by our ideas of what we believe everything in physical reality means. Whether this be of physical nature or mental reality, the things we think we know are just labels of manifestation, meaning that all things and the words which represent them were created at some point in time. So with that being said, I think it would be wise not to get attached to these things, because essentially that would imply that you've become identified with those particular things, whatever they might be and of whatever nature they represent. And I'm not saying these labels don't serve reality, because I believe they do, just as long as we don't lose ourselves to them. Yes, the human race has come far in terms of establishing certain grounds which have carried us up to a point, but we must always bear in mind that everything can be improved upon, and that's the beautiful responsibility we all share, but must still individually choose to cultivate. In so doing, we find our power. It's almost like a remembrance of our true relationship with reality and the very force that makes up reality. The answer always lies in the things that we do, and more particularly why we do them. Because their why is a reflection of the meaning they carry, therefore the meaning will cause and possibly hold a specific effect. Experience is a game, and how much you win or experience will be a direct correlation of the weight your responsibilities carry. It's about how time meaningful priorities became our main topic of discussion, and that's specifically for my fellow youth, the generation with a real chance of spiritual freedom only if they choose to realize such an experience from within their own experience. But first, mental, psychological, death must happen. That is to say, one must work on releasing all attachments, because experience itself must be the attachment, in a general sense, to learn to love life. Stop complaining about situations which they probably created and definitely created meaning for. If you didn't create the so-called situation, you still remain faced with the responsibility of assigning meaning to the situation, or any, literal, thing for that matter. That's what we've always been doing, that's precisely how we co-create our experience. Maybe the way we were raised encouraged the spirit of dependency, and therefore we've always been ready to give our power away to mere attachments which create the addictions we've been primed for. To be honest, nothing in this whole existence truly matters. It matters mostly for us humans because we actually live to give it meaning. So we must let go of beliefs which have kept us limited to a certain mind or way of thinking. That's unquestionably the first responsibility which initiates the process of finding the self. Creating space for yourself within yourself, slowly letting go of the noise you've been listening to, basically, forever. So this will definitely feel uncomfortable for a while, because you will lack a sense of knowing, control, but that's precisely what you are looking for, the zone of not thinking you know, for that's how you will get to see more of the self from a place of clear and pure curiosity. Then you might end up realizing that the whole of reality is actually you. When you look around, you might start to feel things. Don't let that scare you though. It just means that the integration process has begun. You are now as open as you can be with experience, and the responsibility of maintaining such a state will surely lead to greater power, but that power only comes with greater responsibility. And remember, never punch above your weight, but again never sleep on yourself. What you need is equilibrium, balance, neutrality, and all these are born in responsibility. Chapter 27. Choose Gratitude. This book wouldn't be complete without exploring the often overlooked concept of gratitude. I thought I should include it mainly because it seems as though humans don't recognize the importance of this godly state of being, for we've made the act of taking things for granted as normal as breathing, nor do we understand the power inherent in maintaining this state we refer to as gratitude. What we normally exercise or mask as gratitude is only surface level deep. We merely act it out for a specific period of time, for as long as things seem to go our way, and at other times we don't exercise it at all. However, beyond that we live in a state of lack, ingratitude, until the next event comes along which we then deem worthy of expressing some gratitude. Since this is the case, it is only on rare occasions, for most people at the least, when we truly appreciate life. For some weird reason we feel as though in order to appreciate in life there has to be something that happens outside of us to trigger this state of abundance. For gratitude is simply that, acknowledgement of the abundance we already possess or inherit outside our base, human, desires. Chapter 28. Inner Peace Above All Else. Not everyone will like you, and that's absolutely fine so long as you like yourself. Never abandon self for the sake of approval. It's advisable to avoid engaging in activities which leave you feeling negative within yourself, especially not for the sake of conforming to the limited, often selfish ideas of others just because you want to belong, because the fact is if you have to tailor who you are just because you want to fit in some group dynamic, then you most probably better off without them. You'd be better off because you'd still have yourself, and the potential to be more of yourself, unlike being affiliated with people who will never appreciate you for who you are, thus dimming the light of your divine truth. It's a sad reality, I know. But solitude is absolutely necessary if the company you've kept doesn't encourage or inspire you to be the best version of yourself. The people you allow into your energy, the things you do, the thoughts you think, and the beliefs you hold dear to your heart must align with the highest expression of who you are, and you must embody that version unapologetically, thus you step into your highest being and stay there for eternity. Because once you realize the self, you won't ever want to be anything else besides that, and anything which is not aligned to that will instantly stand out and come across as irrational. This internal shift will create distance between what is truly you and the chaos of reality, and this space is your peace. Chapter 29. Breathe. The focus and importance of this chapter might seem trivial to most people, but I must insist on sharing deeper insight into this somewhat simple and conventional idea we understand and recognize as breathing. I must implore you, reader, to never underestimate the power inherent in breath. Not only because breathing keeps us alive and kicking, but mostly because breathing is how we stay connected to the source of life, which is what we've termed as consciousness. Through breath we have access to the life-giving substance which we refer to as oxygen, but somehow I know for sure that there's more to it than what meets the eye, or in our case, the mind. Oxygen is not really oxygen. It's consciousness. When we breathe we are actually breathing in consciousness. Hence breathing keeps us conscious. It's funny that I've been in school nearly all my life, but for some weird reason I don't ever recall being taught about the importance of breath, let alone how to breathe properly and effectively. Now what's crazier is the fact that most people don't even know how to breathe properly, therefore robbed, in a sense, of vital life energy which could be harnessed for personal benefit and ultimately higher perception. This is referred to as shallow breathing, which is basically breathing done to and from the chest region. We often notice this breathing pattern when the chest inflates as one inhales. Proper breathing, on the other hand, is done to and from the abdomen, so it's the stomach region that moves instead of the chest. I won't lie, the shift will require effort and constant remembering on your part. You must catch yourself when breathing shallow and readjust, however the effects will be felt almost immediately and in a variety of ways. Again, because we breathe consciousness, and the more of it we take in, through proper, full breaths, the more conscious we will become, and the more conscious we become, the closer we are drawn to the self. Proper, full, intentional breathing is also a powerful way to anchor yourself in the present moment, because as you focus on breathing sufficiently, the mind will begin to slow down, and once mental activity ceases, inner clarity will be gained. I honestly don't know why it happens that way, but it does, so it's best to make the most of it. So let's take a deep breath. Last words. My final word is this: make it a point that by all means you stay true to your essence and only do the things which feel true to your highest version. This is the version of you that you were born to step into, the self which is whole, complete. For if you are not okay, content, within yourself, you can never make the world okay. Remember that, as far as you experiencing life is concerned, there is no such thing as division, because every part of existence is meant to grow you in all the ways you were meant to grow. There is never a time when this is not happening, but you'll surely miss it if you are too distracted by the contents of physical reality to take notice of the unfolding magic. Truth be told, there's no one way of realizing the self. It could happen anyhow and at any time. It could happen instantly, or it could play out as a gradual process, while the time it takes will depend solely on your capacity to undergo this particular transformation. It is up to us to see this magnificent possibility of coming back to oneself by actually putting in effort of walking the path which will one day, perhaps today, liberate us from our mental prisons. But before this can happen, we must endeavor to reclaim our inner world. Not only that, but also make it an environment which will encourage the realization of peace of mind, healing, love, purpose, and above all else, unity. There's no real gap between what you think of as you, particularly your embodied self, basically your body, and your personal reality. Your personal reality is actually just an extension of your embodied energy, meaning everything around you can actually be a stepping stone towards finding yourself, or at least learning more about yourself. Pay meticulous attention. To be self-aware is to be aware, simply because everything you experience is always experienced from within. So learn to experience yourself from within yourself and exactly how you prefer to experience yourself at any given time, and I strongly suggest that you stop letting the outside world determine how you must experience your being at any time of day, mainly because the world is a chaotic, cruel, and twisted place where people live to forget who they are, because that's just how external reality has been set up. But like everything else, you can most certainly make it work in your favor.